English translation 225th contact. Saturday, 31st December 1988, 16 hours.
It is nice, my friend, to see you once again in person, instead of always just being in telepathic contact with you. It has been a long time since the 7th of July, the last time when you showed up.
Yes, half a year has passed since then. I had to use that time, however, to prepare myself for my coming tasks.
And what tasks are those, if I may ask?
That is no secret. For my part, I prepare myself for learning to take over representative tasks of an Ishwish.
There I'm flabbergasted. You have never told me anything about that. But how is it that you can take over such tasks? Sim Ya-se once explained to me that this was only possible for Ishwish candidates, so to speak. So for a half Ishwish or a half Ishrish, as Sim Ya-se is.
That is of correctness.
Man, then you intend to become an Ishwish. You are thus an Ishwish candidate?
That too is of correctness. In a few years, I will actually be an Ishwish.
Slowly, it is just about being an Ishwish with you. But I am happy for you, my son, that you acquire this honor and dignity.
Your words are sincere and they honor and delight me.
Thank you, my friend. May I ask you something about the prophecy of Enoch, of which we have already spoken some time ago?
That should be no question, for of course, I will talk to you about that.
Good. Should this prophecy be published, perhaps, despite your view that this would still be too early, as you have mentioned?
My view corresponds to the opinion of the High Council. Its advice is that the time for this will be given, at the earliest, at the turn of the millennium. Until then, you should not disclose it publicly. Officially, you should first disseminate it after the 1st of January, 2003. This will then also be the time when you should make an appeal to the governments of the earth, with a warning that World War III could occur if worldwide politically peaceful ways are not immediately taken and followed. You should then also point out that this great threat is especially posed by America, Israel, Iraq, and Palestine, and in particular, America will be the greatest evil, which wants to establish itself militarily and economically in all nations worldwide. And among other things, it gives its reasons for this that particularly in the Islamic world, great and powerful terrorist organizations arise, which cause death, terror, downfall, and destruction all over the world, and which particularly target America, but many other countries will also be concerned. But also Israel and Palestine, as well as Iraq, will be in this evil game, whereby the main guilt for all evils will have to be found with the warmongering and belligerent ringleaders George W. Bush, Yasser Arafat, Saddam Hussein, and Ariel Sharon, as I already explained at earlier times. Nevertheless, if everything still does not turn to the better after the entrance of the new millennium, then World War III, according to the prophecies of Enoch, will probably be unavoidable in the year 2006, upon which 2/3 of Earth humanity will be deprived of their lives. This will be so because tremendously deadly weapons will be used, which will be founded on a biological and chemical, as well as an atomic and radiation-related basis. Through this, a catastrophe will come over the Earth and its humanity, as its equal has never been given before and will also never be given again. However, Earth humanity's reason can still triumph if it lets this reason prevail, and if it relieves all irresponsible national powerful figures and their supporters and followers from their offices and replaces these with responsible human beings who only use their leadership positions for the well-being of humanity, and with this, for true peace and for actual freedom. the irresponsible and criminal elements of the national powerful figures and the self-glorifying graces as well as their followers, who cry out for war and terror, must be deposed by the people immediately, and indeed, especially in the coming time, when the irresponsible ones already mentioned by me earlier and all human life-despising powerful figures in America, Israel, Palestine, and Iraq indulge in their deadly and destructive madness. Of course, many other national powerful figures could also be named, who irresponsibly abuse their power, but the real ringleaders of all disasters are the powerful ones and their followers in the nations of America, Israel, Palestine, and Iraq.
I see bad prospects for the future, but I will do my work at the appropriate time and will begin with it in January of 2003. Some sensible humans will surely let themselves be taught, but the majority of the dull humans and irresponsible leaders of the world probably will not be a part of it. Thus, I think that all warnings and explanations will be useless, for who listens to a single person? Thus, I will be as I was before, a lonesome caller in the wilderness, whose advice will only be consciously perceived and followed by some. Nevertheless, it is necessary that one raises the word and yells out everything into the world that has to be yelled out. Of course, the super clever ones will, as usual, idiotically exclaim that such statements and remarks as well as explanations were only made and given when an evil was already threatening. Otherwise, nothing would have been spoken of such. This is an idiotic remark that has neither hand nor foot, for in truth, such has been spoken of here again and again, and indeed, already since ages ago.
That is of correctness. Such stupid remarks will, however, also appear in your group, for even there, it will be inevitable that through ignorance and unreasonableness, voices will be heard, claiming that predictions and prophecies were always given whenever a breakup of the community or a drop in group members was threatening.
Do you really mean that?
This is already certain, as a look into the future has made clear to me. Such statements, however, are not of great concern. Rather, they only testify of the immaturity of the persons concerned in terms of their capacities for proper assessments of the situation. This is, indeed, extremely unfortunate, but sooner or later, benefit will also arise from this for the fallible ones, when they must recognize the reality of the whole thing through bitter experiences and find out that they did great injustice with their thoughtless and false statements, and to be sure both to you as well as to us.
It is really unfortunate that also in this matter, prudence can only be acquired through harm.
That is not to be changed. Unfortunately, because the conscious awakening, in terms of the recognition of the truth, leads to the committing, recognizing, learning, experiencing, and resolving of errors among human beings. That is the only way to go.
However, that is not only the case with the Earth humans, but with all human life forms in the universe.
That is of correctness.
Exactly. It would also be unjust if only the human being of the Earth had to go down this path of committing errors. Then I would now like to ask yet another question. Of course, also in connection with America. You once said that during the time of slavery in America, the Americans operated real slave-breeding farms because it was much cheaper than the kidnappings in Africa and then the transports of the enslaved black people in ships to America, whereby during these transports, many slaves on the transport ships often died of thirst, starved, or died of disease, or were maltreated and beaten to death by the slave hunters and slave drivers. The slaves that were crammed together on the slave-breeding farms were impregnated. According to your words, by rape through breeding rams, select white Americans and so-called property slaves, in order to ensure slave breeding or slave descendants. In addition, now the question, how long actually can America still conceal these facts?
Up to the turn of the millennium, it will not officially be the case, as we know.
But then later, and then also in public, right?
That will certainly be so. But the time for that is not known to me.
My next question has reference to microorganisms, as well as to beetles and insects of all kinds on Earth.
You once said that out of all existing creatures on Earth, if I may say so, still about 10 to 12 million of these are waiting to be discovered.
Since you have, indeed, specified these creatures and, thus, have not just divided them into animals in general, but rather into mammals that are exclusively regarded as animals, as well as into reptiles, fish, apis, and birds, etc., which are not designated as animals. So I think that also beetles are not regarded by you as insects, but just specifically as beetles, whereas insects of all kinds have a specific value, just as insects. Am I right about this?
Your acceptance is of correctness. In principle, it is wrong to designate all non-human life forms as animals, for always in accordance with its kind, it concerns a specific life form. In the case of the animal, it concerns a mammal, so a nursing being, as it was known here since ancient times, whereby the earth person has falsified this term over the course of time into a breathing being, and found a general use for it for all non-human life forms. But actually, the various non-human life forms are not simply to be designated overall as animals, for they should be specified as mammals, and these, thus, as animals, then others as dinosaurs, always in accordance with their specific kinds as birds, fish, reptiles, and beetles, as cicadas, butterflies, worms, grasshoppers, mussels, corals, dragonflies, etc., or as actual insects, which have particular genera.
But especially the ones mentioned last, such as beetles, cicadas, and butterflies, etc., are designated as insects by our zoologists. This is probably so, because these life forms either exhibit relationships with others or are incorporated into a special metamorphosis.
That is, in principle, wrong, because relational aspects or metamorphic processes alone cannot and may not be used to determine a genus or species.
Your explanation in the zoologist's ears. But the whole thing is not actually what I wanted to ask about, for I'm interested in how many of these small life forms, such as beetles and insects, etc., are still undiscovered on our Earth.
Larger to large life forms are still estimated at 12 million, which can still be discovered by the Earth humans. So far, not all are known even to us. Regarding the aforementioned small living things, the undiscovered number is even larger, namely around 34 million. Also, in this respect, not all are known to us.
And what about the microorganisms? These are certainly everywhere in the rock, in the seas, in the perpetual ice of the mountains, the North Pole and the South Pole, and certainly also in the volcanoes, in the Earth's interior, in magma, in the jungles of a tropical and non-tropical nature, as well as in the red-hot desert areas, in the steppes, in the tundra, and also everywhere else. Even under the perpetual ice of the poles and the mountains, there are probably many more undiscovered microorganisms. Or am I mistaken there?
No, you are not mistaken, for your supposition is right. Millions of microorganisms are undiscovered on Earth. And, as you correctly said, even under the mighty ice fields of the poles, such as in Antarctica, where there are, among other things, under-ice lakes that contain their own ecological systems.
By under-ice lakes? You probably mean lakes that are located under enormous layers of ice, in which there exists a system of life forms, and, thus, even an ecosystem, particularly a system of microorganisms.
That is of correctness.
But why, then, are there such lakes under the ice? I mean, Why does not the water freeze down to the bottom of the lakes? Does the Earth's heat play a role there, or especially much salt in the water and a lack of atmospheric influences and solar influences limited to a minimum, and cosmic influences?
Your assumptions is remarkable, indeed really amazing, because the whole thing corresponds to actuality.
It is gratifying that my thoughts and ideas still work properly after the massive headaches that attacked me a few minutes ago. But how old, then, are these under-ice lakes?
They came into being about 3,000 years ago. And before you ask, the salinity of the under-ice water is many times higher than normal seawater.
Exactly, I just wanted to ask about that. So at least microorganisms can also live in very high salinity, except in extremely great cold and heat.
Certain microorganisms also live directly in the salt, as well as in acids and in other substances, concerning which the Earth person supposes that no life exists therein.
I also wanted to ask about that. Good, then something else. I was asked the question, why in the final battle at Berlin, only a few German soldiers had fallen, which is provable. Moreover, a 15-year-old girl named Anne Frank, who had been murdered in a concentration camp, should have written diaries that are supposed to have been preserved to this day. In addition, however, it is generally said that the whole thing is a fabricated story, and that the manuscript of the diaries is a forgery. Do you know anything about this?
The history of the Second World War, even of the first one, on Earth belongs to one of my fields of knowledge. Therefore, I am very well informed over all the facts. So first to Anne Frank. This girl really existed and was murdered in a concentration camp. Also, the records of the diaries attributed to her come from her own hand, and in all their remarks, correspond in every relation to the truth. It is also of correctness that in Berlin, during the final battle, relatively very few German soldiers lost their lives. For the majority of the combatants were not Germans, but rather Nazis, and those enslaved to Adolf Hitler and fanatical SS members, who were mainly recruited from men who were citizens of Denmark, Holland, and Norway, but who entered into German military service.
If I remember Ptah's explanations correctly, then World War II demanded more than 50 million human lives.
World War II demanded 53,328 victims, whereby several millions of murdered human beings were on account of the war criminal machinations of the Americans, mostly innocent civilians, like children, women, and elderly people.
The belligerent Americans, however, also murdered in various other countries around the world, where they intervened autocratically and as a world police, and through this sowed much poverty, suffering, and misery, as well as destruction. And in my judgment, they will continue to do so in complete irresponsibility, and for the purpose of taking the world and all its resources for themselves. And indeed, no matter how many people have to be murdered, and no matter what great destruction must be caused. But in addition, I would like to say, even when I speak of America and of the Americans, I only speak of the criminal and absolutely irresponsible leaders, their advisors and governmental ones, as well as national followers, and of the command implementing institutions and forces, which bring death, ruin, destruction, suffering, pain, and misery over the world and the people. Thus, my speech is not of the beautiful country of America, and especially not of those Americans who do not conform with those who start and who order wars, or who bring death, downfall, and destruction as their misguided, willingly irresponsible national and murderous, or even fanatical tools.
You will surely keep to the fact that America can and will continue in the same wise because the peoples and responsible persons of all countries of the world do not want to recognize or simply do not recognize the truth about America's desire for world domination. This is often due to anxiety and cowardice, through which they want to see in America a strong partner at their side, which should help them in emergencies. Thus, country for country and people for people gradually sell themselves to America, which can irresistibly realize its plans for world domination through this in an easier manner.
I will use your words when I fulfill the task intended for me. But now, I would like to talk about something else. Already several times, we have had discussions about the cloning of animals and humans. For me, it is completely clear as to what a clone basically is. Just an internal and external organic reproduction of a person, of whom a cell is used for the cloning. It is also clear to me that the consciousness of the male cell donor or female cell donor will not enter into a clone, but that the clone is animated by another spirit form and, thus also by another overall consciousness block and accordingly, also by another consciousness or by another personality. Also, it is a matter of impossibility that by a male cell donor or female cell donor, his or her consciousness can be transferred into a clone. And since that time now comes soon, as you have already explained several times during earlier conversations, when research becomes acute and open to cloning worldwide, then a few more explanatory words from your side will certainly be advantageous. At the same time, if you could even address, for example, the greatest danger of cloning, I mean in terms of what can impair the lives of clones, then this would perhaps be of use.
In repetition of your remarks, I can confirm that a clone is only an internal and external organic reproduction of a body, that is to say, of an animal, etc., or a person. Nevertheless, it does not concern the same animal instinct nature, as well as not the same human personality, and thus not the same physical body from which a cell is taken and, with it, a clone is created. In every case, it concerns a completely different body that is entirely just a reproduction of the body from which the cell is taken. Also, the spirit form animating the clone, which is connected with its own overall consciousness block and with its own personality, can never be the same as that of the person donating the cell. In truth, a spirit form that is independent from the person donating the cell, with its associated overall consciousness block and personality created by it, moves into the clone and animates this. And since the spirit form is of a creational nature, it cannot be manipulated by human beings. Consequently, it also cannot be transferred from a human donating a cell to a clone. This is also not possible for the overall consciousness block, as well as not for the personality created by this, which is integrated into it. Moreover, the spirit form and the overall consciousness block with its created personality are an inseparable unit, from which it likewise follows that a transferring of this to a clone cannot be carried out by a person donating a cell or by any other person. This is precisely because the spirit form can be manipulated in no wise by human beings. Concerning the greatest danger in cloning, it is to be explained that this can be found in the deformation and mutation of the growth genes, particularly the growth factor 2 gene, as we name it, and also make it known to the earthly scientists via impulses. In the case of improper cloning, this gene can lead to the formation of lethal tumors. This will also be the case for a fairly long time with the cloning research of the earthly scientists, before they get the secrets of cloning further on track, through which this danger that is fatal for clones can be avoided. But this requires a lot of time and research, as well as experiments, which will go into the tens of thousands. The factor of the genes falling prey to deformities and mutations is founded in the lack of methyl groups in the DNA. The lack of methyl molecules in the growth genes produces a too rapid and too large growth of the internal and external organs of a clone's body, which sooner or later inevitably leads to serious illnesses, deformities, and to the death of the body. Of the internal organs, Primarily, the kidneys and the liver are affected, but also everything else of the body in a lesser or stronger form. Especially in the 11th chromosome, deformities and mutations occur upon cloning, which lead to lethal growth enlargements of various organs. However, all the other approximately 30,000 genes are susceptible upon cloning, whereby also lethal cell, vascular, and organ enlargements appear in special forms of elephantiasis. In this consequence, the entire immune system is also simultaneously overloaded and weakened, by what means severe malfunctions of the organs arise. The whole thing arises from the fact that upon an improper cloning, the methyl molecules of various genes are damaged, by what means ultimately, at any time, a failure of the organs can also occur. Thus, if the methyl molecules which activate the genes are defective, or if they are completely missing, then a successful cloning of life forms of every kind is absolutely impossible in the way that healthy and long-lasting, viable clones can be created. The cloning of life forms, so also of humans, cannot be prevented, for it is in the nature of human progress that even cloning makes a great contribution to evolution. Even if, in the coming time, worldwide steps are first taken to ban all cloning, the inevitable step will still be taken in the course of time, even if this will first happen only in secret in some places. Technological and medical development and human progress are not to be stopped, and also not the evolution of the consciousness and the spirit. But it will still take a long time before it is correctly decided upon and handled through reason with regard to the cloning of human life forms. Indeed, many scientists will work on this and achieve some small successes, but they will not succeed very quickly in creating healthy and viable clones because the aforementioned danger cannot first be recognized and cannot be removed. Thus, it will still take a fairly long time before everything can be handled properly and then also be brought to useful application. When the time comes, which will be in a few years, animals will be cloned first, but no life will be granted for too long because they will already perish after a short time or only after a few years. Also, only a few clones will actually be produced, because hundreds and thousands of tests and experiments will be necessary to create just a single clone. Unfortunately, it is inevitable that when cloning research becomes acute, irresponsible elements will appear, such as doctors, scientists, and unscrupulous, criminal and mendacious as well as deceitfully inclined sectarians, who will try to create clones for despicable, selfish, self-aspiring, and profit-greedy, as well as self-glorifying reasons through the pretense of false facts and a false reality, as we know from a look into the future. Through lies and deceit, these irresponsible elements will mislead many human beings and make them believe unreal things, making them willing, of course for very large and horrendous financial contributions, to have themselves or deceased relatives cloned, whereby eternal life will be mendaciously and fraudulently promised for cloning one's own person. This, in addition to the fact that criminal elements want to and will make capital out of cloning, by misleading women and men who are unable to reproduce to create genetically reproduced offspring, and indeed, even though Earth humanity overflows in its mass more and more. This is a fact, by which more and more problems constantly and irresistibly arise in every respect, and indeed, also in the sense that men increasingly become impotent and women increasingly become incapable of conceiving. However, the problem of overpopulation is not solved through this, because more and more descendants still appear worldwide, through which eventually everything will get completely out of control.
Something with your remarks is not clear to me. Namely that which you once told me, that cloning research has already been pursued for quite some time on the Earth in a confidential manner, and that a clone has already existed for years.
That is of correctness. It concerns the fact that in a certain country, which I may not name officially, an extremely confidential project of cloning research has been pursued for several years, namely for the purpose of creating cloned human fighting machines. Indeed, a human male life form was already cloned, but it is only capable of surviving in that it is kept alive by medical apparatuses. Unofficially, other human clones will be created as laboratory objects around the middle of the 90s, but this will remain very top secret and will be denied. First of all, only the cloning of animals will be made known.
I can imagine that. And how will it be then, with these human clones? Are they capable of surviving then?
No, even these will only prolong their existence through medical apparatuses.
Horrible. When I just think of their working consciousness, I feel sick.
The cloned male life form that already exists is no longer mighty in clear thought because it stunted its consciousness completely. The new laboratory clones will also suffer the same fate.
Criminal, but perhaps a release for the clones.
That is of correctness.
I was given a question that I could not answer, namely that, when in the last 20,000 years did the worst earthquakes in Switzerland take place? Since you deal with Earth's geology, you should actually be able to answer the question for me, right?
The largest and most severe earthquakes in the area of present-day Switzerland were, counted back from today, 1,601 years ago, as well as 2,420 and 14,560 years ago. In addition, other severe earthquakes are forthcoming in the future, particularly after the turn of the millennium, but not only in Switzerland, but rather throughout Europe and even all over the world.
Then one can indeed make oneself ready for all sorts of things. But again, something regarding earthquakes. On the Great Journey, Ta explained that there are underwater earthquakes. So earthquakes that occur below sea level or a level of a lake, and sometimes also in lakes or seas, beneath the water level, mountain slides or landslides take place. He also explained that colossal tidal waves would then emerge, so-called tsunamis, which would go hunting at tremendous speed. Unfortunately, I can no longer remember what he said about the speed that such tidal waves reach. Do you know about this?
Tsunami is the right designation, as these wild waters are called among you. They reach speeds that sometimes exceed 1,000 kilometers per hour, such as that gigantic tidal wave that emerged when the Santorini volcano in the Mediterranean Sea erupted and exploded, whereby the waters advanced far inland into Egypt and caused much life to die and the Nile to turn red from all the blood.
That is well known to me. When the tidal wave fell back, it ran back into the Mediterranean Sea and raced eastward in order then to flood the land of Syria.
That is of correctness.
Also in the year 1883, in the case of the explosion of the Krakatoa volcano between Sumatra and Java, when this blew up, a 20-meter-high tsunami emerged, by which the coastal regions of West Java and Southeast Sumatra were devastated. But let us leave this, because I still have here some other questions. Since everything has its two sides, so positive and negative, every universe belt and any space matter relating to this would actually have to have both power poles, or am I mistaken there?
You are not mistaken, because your supposition is of correctness. Only by the fact that both positive as well as negative are given is an existence possible. With the universe belts, the negative force is directed inwardly, and the positive force is directed outwardly. Even in the outer layers of the material belt, this is so given. It is just that, in its internal space, the actual material zone exists, in which the forms of matter build up in other forms of positive and negative. Through the external interaction of both power poles of the belt, so in the extreme peripheral area, positive, and in the innermost peripheral area, negative, the matter is able to condense itself in the belt's center, that is to say, in the belt's central ring, in such a form that it becomes of a coarse material form. All other belts have positive and negative power poles that flow into one another without crossing each other, without a central ring, and, along with this, coarse material matter being able to develop in them. This possibility only exists in the material belt, which forms the visible universe with all its stars, etc., for this belt is the only one in which coarse material matter can develop.
And solely this material belt forms our visible and explorable universe. But still other time levels, and thus other dimensioned universe levels, are incorporated into this. However, the whole universe, with its other inner and outer belts that are invisible from the material universe, is tremendously much larger, more enormous and older than the material belt. That is to say, our visible universe that is in the constant change of becoming and passing. From the inner and outer belts, in which our visible universe is enclosed, as Ptah explained, if I understood him correctly, a so-called background radiation proceeds, which can also be designated as background noise, etc. In addition to this, in our visible part of the universe, so in the material belt or in the material universe, coarse material matter of every kind, including electrons, gases, neutrons, neutrinos, and atoms as well as all subatomic particles are in such a rapid process of becoming and passing that no firm, coarse material matter becomes older than about 36,036,000 years before it breaks up again into gases and subatomic materials, from which, in the course of time, new stars and galaxies, etc., form again. And the fact that up to now, our astronomical scientists could not yet see to the end of our visible universe and think that this would only be between 12 and 15 billion 12,000 and 15,000 years old is only due to the fact that their technological devices and apparatuses are not yet developed so far that they would be able to do this. And when this is one day the case, they will still only be able to see and hear to the end of our visible universe. While to them, the really gigantic size of the universe, with its 6 other inner and outer belts, will still be concealed, and will be a secret with 7 seals for a very long time.
That is of correctness.
Then still another question about gravity. Like each and everything that exists, gravitational power surely also has a speed. In addition, at least, so I have understood Ptah's explanation relating to this, gravitational power is incorporated into the same speed limit as light. Gravitational power is not just given with suns and galaxies. Planets or meteors, asteroids, comets, as well as with universal nebulous formations and neutrino clouds, but rather, it also exists in universal space itself. At least, that's how I understood Ptah's explanations. And since I have now been asked about this by Professor Brenner, and I want to give him the answer correctly, I would again like to ask if what I have said is right.
As usual, everything is of correctness. You are a very attentive listener when something is said or explained to you. Moreover, you have a precise and phenomenal memory.
Too much honor, my friend. It is just that through the upbringing by my parents, and through the instruction of Svath, Priest Zimmermann, and my very helpful teachers Karl Graf and Gustav Lehmann, as well as through various Buddhist monks, I have learned to perceive everything around me very precisely, and also to listen very attentively when something is said or explained to me. Thus, the merit does not lie with me, but rather in the love, kindness, and far-sighted upbringing of my parents, as well as in the selfless efforts of Priest Zimmermann and Svath, as well as all others.
That is very well of correctness, but you should not sink into modesty and let all your willing Endeavoring and laborious learning go unsaid, because without the application of these skills that were created by you, especially during your early childhood, all instructions would have been useless.
Let us leave that, my friend. Rather, explain to me what you wanted to say some time ago about plants and animals, when we were interrupted at the end of our conversation by the knocking at the door. We talked about the poison of various plants and animals, but because of the disturbance, you then left, and did not get involved any further into the subject.
That is of correctness. We talked about the evolution of plants and animals, and I wanted to explain that the toxic plants, reptiles, insects, and animals, etc., on the earth have entered into a stage of their evolution as they have begun to develop larger and stronger amounts of poison. This is an unavoidable consequence of evolution, which is determined by the environment.
Then another important question, in reference to belief in God or the religious belief of human beings. Can you tell me, since you deal with brain research, whether a human being's belief in God and saints is based on any damage to the brain or not? Somehow it just seems to me that belief in God and saints as well as in ghosts, dead talkers, and similar nonsense could be based on brain damage and damage to the consciousness.
One could say that, in a certain sense, but this damage is caused by the world of thoughts and feelings of a person himself or herself. Through religious as well as other delusion-believing thoughts and feelings, electric tensions, which affect certain areas of the brain, arise in the brain. If these areas are hit by the electric swinging waves, then impulses form in the brain by which a delusional faith is awakened, and by which even strong visionary pictures can appear and things can be sensed, which in no wise correspond to the reality. Visions such as the seeing of God, saints, and Jesus Christ as well as Virgin Mary apparitions, etc. are not unusual, as also not the appearance of stigmata, as these were added to Emmanuel during the crucifixion on the hands and feet, on the loins, etc., or on the head through the crown of thorns. The electrical swinging waves, which are caused by religious beliefs and other delusional beliefs or otherwise, influence the affected brain areas so much that very quickly a form of addiction and mania arises, from which a person can only escape with difficulty. Fairly often the whole thing leads to evil fanaticism. But now the time is spent, my friend.
Of course. Then until we meet again, Quetzal, and quite dear thanks for all your explanations.
I always find it a pleasure to talk with you. Until we meet again, my friend.